Merry Christmas, everyone, from Let's Build a Collection. I hope you all received something memorable this year, whether it was a game, a surprise visit from a loved one, or maybe just some good news. I can't help but think back to 1990 each Christmas, which is one of the earliest Christmas mornings that I can remember. And I thought it might be fun to share that experience with you, or at the very least, just preserve it for myself here for a while. So let's take that trip back to 1990. I'm in kindergarten. My best friend Jimmy and I have hung out every single day for 3 months at this point, and who knows how many times we played the NES at his house. And I remember things like Burger Time, Marble Madness, Gauntlets, and of course Super Mario. I also spent time with our family friends Brent and Brad, where they also had an NES, and I played games like Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, Ghostbusters, Astyanax, Excitebike, and Duck Hunt. Yeah, I seriously do remember all these titles, and where I played them. This was a big deal to a 6-year-old. I needed that NES. We would go to the local mall and see Santa, and of course I had to tell him that I wanted the NES for Christmas. I can remember our mall also had a Rudolph that you could see in a side entrance, and his nose would light up, and I'm sure that I told Rudolph too, whether it was man station or not, I want that NES. We'd walk down to the KB toy store in the mall and take a look at all the Nintendos and games that they had, and my mom would try to talk me into the $5 Atari 2600 bin, but I knew I wanted that Nintendo. Atari was so 1988, Mom. And then Christmas morning came, and our tree was amazing. My mom always went all out with our tree. Truly amazing. My brother and I would sneak down the steps toward the tree by 4 a.m. and my mom would leave it on all night long. Of course, she could hear us because our steps creaked, and I'm sure we were too excited to be quiet. But she always had a stuffed animal for us under the tree that we were allowed to come down and get and take that back to our room. So we did. And I'm sure we also took a sneak peek and accidentally bumped into a few conspicuous looking packages from Santa, hoping to get a preview of what it was to come later that morning. But we couldn't officially begin until the first glimmer of daylight had broke, and we'd have to go back upstairs and try to fall back asleep. I don't remember having much success doing that, but my younger brother might have. Our room was on the western side of the house, so we couldn't easily see the first bit of daylight, but sure enough, when it was lighter out, we could clearly see the house across the street, and it was time. We shared a room. We had a bunk bed this time for the first 12 or 13 years. And we're about 17 months apart, so with me being older. I can remember standing on the bottom bunk and pushing him awake to climb down and hit the living room. I'm going to say that my parents were almost as excited because it was probably the first year that I had really wanted something, and I have to imagine that they were excited to see our expressions. We eventually did get a huge over-the-shoulder camcorder, but this year, I don't think we had any moments to capture this story. It had to have been one of the last presents that we opened, and I'm afraid I cannot remember anything else other than the Nintendo and that reindeer stuffed animal that we got earlier in the morning. But I can remember opening that Nintendo, and it came with the Zapper and the Mario Duck Hunt combo. And I think my dad was just as excited to play Duck Hunt, being a hunter. And then I opened the game, Bure Fighter. I'd never heard of it. It was super colorful dragon art though, and the gameplay looked intoxicating. I opened another, was Captain Skyhawk, another game I'd never heard of. I honestly thought I was in heaven. And then almost comically at that time, I opened the Atari 2600 games. Remember how I said I felt that was old school and not quite as good as the Nintendo? Well, I have such a different appreciation now, but that took decades to understand that. I can't blame a 6-year-old for that. I unwrapped E.T. and Battlezone. Battlezone was surprisingly a ton of fun, and I remember immediately going out to play it in the other room while my dad hooked up the NES. We had 2 quote-unquote living rooms, if you will. And before you think I grew up rich and in a huge house, it was more of an addition on top of a porch than it was an official living room. But it's where the Atari was for everyone to play. And I can't tell you if it just felt like forever or if it actually took an hour to hook up the Nintendo. but I managed to play a lot of Battlezone and ET that morning before the Nintendo was hooked up. Hooking up anything to those old TVs, those big console TVs with the antenna and game switches in the back, and the prongs with the screws for the antenna plug, they kept popping off. That was a huge challenge, so props to my dad for getting that thing hooked up for us. And of course, as I started to play, I had to call Jimmy. And I did stupid things like, "Hey, can you hear it?" as I'm playing one of the games in the background and trying to drag the wall-mounted phone's cord to its limit and get it close to the TV as possible. I probably got an hour of Nintendo in before I had to get a shower and go to my grandparents for Christmas, where I undoubtedly was not interested and only wanted to get back to my new Nintendo. I can remember telling my cousin about it, and I hopefully wasn't too in-your-face about it because they only had the Atari 2600. Though they had a ton of games, their game selection was always amazing to me. And that was my first gaming Christmas. Every year after that, for as long as I had a Nintendo or later on a Sega Genesis, I can remember getting games for Christmas. I remember Genesis games like Risky Woods, Gadget Twins, Whiz and Liz, Dynamite Heady. Games at the time I would have thought were really off the wall and probably came from the bargain bin at KB Toys, and today probably fetch more than you might think. I never realized how good I had it those early gaming years. And this was a time when most of us played the same, maybe 10 to 20 games if you were lucky, over and over, because the availability and the acceptance was nothing like it was today. Merry Christmas, everyone. I hope you enjoyed this brief story of Christmas 1990, where I started my collection. If only we had recorded that magical Christmas to watch today. Take care.